Hi, good evening, everyone. My name is Nestor COF, and my topic is on the No Child Left Behind Act of 2002. To give you a brief background, in 2002, President George Bush signed what became known as the No Child Left Behind Act. The act is implemented to oversee the efficiency of schools to provide qualifying education for higher learning. This is done through yearly standardized testing taken by students mainly in grades 3 through 8. Evaluations are then made by the governmental officials officiated by the Secretary of Education. From this, I present my major claim, which is the No Child Left Behind Act has a significant negative effect for children to become competent students. Following are my secondary claims. First, the act negatively affects the general school districts, including faculty, staff, and administration. Second, the act negatively affects students. And third, my claim, which I might not be able to cover due to time constraints, the act has an undefined definition. So for my first secondary claim, the No Child Left Behind Act negatively affects the general school districts, including faculty, staff, or administration. University of Southern California staff member Patricia Birch writes in Contemporary Sociology magazine a review on a book by G.L. Koyama titled Making Failure Pay. Birch reviews the negative effects No Child Left Behind has on teacher-tutor qualifications in the following way. Koyama considers the irony of the act that requires schools to have highly qualified teachers while not requiring its tutors to be highly qualified. Students eligible for after-school tutoring deserve the most experienced teachers with demonstrated records of effectiveness. Andrew Caffrey writes in the William and Mary Bill of Rights Journal an article titled No Ambiguity Left Behind. Caffrey writes on the sanctions and consequences schools undergo if they do not meet their standards, including the process of reopening the school as a public charter school, replacing all or most of the staff, hiring a private management company to take over the school, or forcing the state to run the school. Obviously, such changes are potentially drastic and extremely costly. Caffrey then continues with the drastic measures schools sometimes take in order to evade these consequences, including an example which is fairly close to us. 23 states structure their achievement plans in accordance with this supposition, requiring smaller gains in the earlier years and steeper gains following 2007. California was one of these such states and is currently experiencing some of the most drastic increases. In 2001, the state had only a 13.6% of its students proficient in reading. In response, it promised a yearly progress rate of 2.2% between 2002 and 2007. Afterwards, the rate would balloon near 11% each year until the 2014 deadline. Although it may be seen as good numbers, such goals of California to achieve can be deemed nearly impossible when we look at it in the long run and at a bigger scale. And along with California, Caffrey writes how Illinois and Connecticut spend millions of dollars when the government doesn't provide enough to cover their costs in order to comply with the No Child Left Behind Act, meaning that they became in debt with themselves. For my secondary claim, the No Child Left Behind Act negatively affects students. George Miller is a Democratic representative from California and the senior Democrat on the House Education and the Workforce Committee. Miller writes in U.S. News and World Report an article titled The GOP Education Bill Focuses on Politics, Not Students. On a direct first-hand basis, Miller gives his opinion on how No Child Left Behind is affecting students in this following quote. Rather than focusing on what is right for students, the House Republicans passed a bill that focuses on what's easy for adults and politicians. It slashes vital programs and cuts educational funding to lock in across-the-board cuts known as sequestration. It no longer ensures schools take action when students are not achieving a grade level or do not graduate from high school. It allows any students with a disability, regardless of type of disability, to be taught to different, lower standards. And it walks away from the broad consensus reached throughout the country that our schools must prepare students to graduate college ready and career ready. Jackie King writes in News Politics magazine an article titled "Stealing Our Schools." King gives an estimate based on studies and on the National School Boards Association on how 70% of the schools will fail to reach this progress, and the consequences for students once a school has been sanctioned. But one of the effects of schools failing deals with the number of dropouts in the secondary education, something King highlights in the following manner. Perhaps the most disturbing trend is a rise in the dropout rate in many districts. The hiding of accurate figures is accomplished in many ways. No Child Left Behind requires regular reports of how students perform on standardized tests and punishes schools that fail to progress. But it does not require the same degree of rigor in tracking dropouts. States are allowed to set their own formula for calculating graduation rates. This has allowed many states to drastically undercount the number of dropouts. For example, New Mexico ignores all the students who have left school before becoming seniors. Massachusetts has decided to count those students who later seek a GED as high school graduates. Texas counted students who left school as transients rather than dropouts, because they might always decide to come back to school later. In conclusion, I reiterate my major claim, which is the No Child Left Behind Act has a significant negative effect on the educational system, including for students, faculty, staff, administration, and the general school districts. I supported my claims by providing testimonies on how the Act negatively affects school districts and their respective school systems, and on how the Act negatively affects students by taking away funding from programs, and in turn the response students have on this issue. Thank you.
All right, Nestor, the proposition's very clear. You did a good job laying out the secondary points, although you did qualify whether or not that third point was ever going to be arrived at, and as we discovered, it was not going to get there in time. So you might as well just leave that out. Maybe some practice would make sure that you know how much time you actually had, and then you wouldn't even have to bother talking about that. I'm not sure how that point advances the claim, the ambiguity anyway. I think you're better off with the two arguments that you're presenting. You signpost those points very clearly as you get to them, so that's pretty good. You do a pretty good background on some of the things. I was a little bit confused on the first point because you spend a lot of time talking about what California's goals are going to be statistically, what they're supposed to increase to, and so on and so forth. And then I didn't get the follow-up that said that they either achieved those goals or they failed to achieve those goals, or what percentage of schools achieved those goals versus what percentage failed to achieve those goals. And on the issue of the sanctions or the punishments or the consequences, whatever term they're using, I'm looking for an illustration of any of those consequences being put into place that then produce the desirable or the undesirable outcomes that you're talking about on the second point. I'm looking for some information about schools who got their funding cut or who were taken away from state control or put into a charter system that would have, or even all the staff being fired, and I think we need to have some of those illustrations. You say that that's what the Act allows, and at the moment, if you don't have any illustrations, that either means that nobody is following the Act or that people are meeting their goals. And I think the argument you're making at the end is if they are meeting their goals, they're cheating in meeting their goals. And I think that that would, that applies on the graduation rates, but it doesn't apply on the standardized tests, so we need some information about that. I know it's a complicated argument to make in a short amount of time, so that might be one of those things where you have to focus, and maybe one of the secondary claims would have been more appropriate to use as your main proposition. I did have a little bit of an issue with the piece of testimony from the representative in Congress who basically, if he makes a claim about it being a politically based argument, and then he proceeds to make a whole bunch of politically based arguments about it, and I'm wondering, okay, well, where's the stuff, the very things that I just said that you need to have to show that it's got some kind of problem? He's got all those consequences listed. He says, that's politically motivated or whatever, blah 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 blah. And I'm like, okay, so where's the retribution that's taken place, or where's the proof that that's likely to happen. It's one of these things where it sounds to me like a boogeyman. It's one of those things that somebody holds up and says, the boogeyman's going to come to get you, so let's change it so the boogeyman can't get you. And I'm going, well, where's the boogeyman? And I need to see him. Thank you.